Okay, I'm apparently live and should have coffee. I should have brought water. Spicy title. Michael, hi. 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 I appreciate seeing you around more. I miss you. I value you. Use kind. Use important. Use, what did she say? Use kind. Use important. I can't remember what she says. So I was listening to this is something I think a lot about, and I have forever, and I think it's just so fundamental and important. Uh, and it's something that I think is often very misunderstood in relation to Christianity. And as much as I love my Jews, I love my Jews. Uh, Chezi, Yosef, Jacob, some. Uh, I think this is I think this is a fundamental difference. If Chezi or Yosef show up, um, you're ridiculous. Morning, Mandy, Gavin. I think this is a difference between yes, that's what I said. Jacob's not as nice to me, and I'm not as much of a Christian as I should, and it's harder for me to love people that aren't as nice to me. Or affirming. Jacob would say he's nice. That's true. Steelman Jacob. Jacob would say he's nice to me by telling me I'm a fool who doesn't know what I'm talking about. What is a Jew? Um, so what? Is there a Grail Country Discord chat going on right now? Weird. Who's in there? So PBK's homeroom. I'm going to play a clip because I do have a number of things I want to get to as I am monologuing and talking to man, I also watched, so I've heard Bill Burr talking about the healthcare CEO shooting and the Luigi guy. Will this get me flagged YouTube? And because I had a conversation last night with my son about that and free speech, and so I've been thinking about that. I watched the clip, which was the CNN panel discussion talking about it, and more than anything, listen, the hive mind, the comments, the proto online community of CNN that is suffering its way into TLC territory, maybe, God willing, because it's become you could potentially become relational more than ideological, because the relation, what does Ian McGilchrist says? There's some like no. Uh, relation precedes relata or whatever, like that kind of stuff. Okay, maybe true, but largely irrelevant to most people. I I don't know what to think about live streams also, by the way, because they're so strange. I was talking to Seabax about it a little bit off camera. He popped in the live stream yesterday. The live stream yesterday went like over 6 hours. I have not listened to all of it, so I don't know how everybody else could. Like, that's the interesting thing about a live stream. Probably a lot of people don't listen to my monologue. They just like see it happened afterwards because they're maybe in a different time zone or something, and then they come and click on it and wait for the people to come in and start watching it there for whatever persons they're interested in. Because here's the thing, what you're interested in, what you find meaningful, what you find salient is what you pay attention to, and attention is the most powerful thing in the universe. And you can only see what you pay attention to, which has to do with value, and it's tied into all this. Okay, so let's lay out the mosaic. All right. Here's the mosaic we have. I mean, go watch the CNN panel discussion about Bill Burr. It's very good. And I do think the panelists are out of touch. And I don't believe the shit they're saying. And I think they mischaracterize what Bill Burr said. Because I don't think he's lionizing people who murder CEOs. He's just saying it's clear why this kid did it. And if you can't see that, you're out of touch. And I think he's right. And I think the comments show that you're out of touch. Sit in your idealism and your egoic intellect and lose out on reality. What do you say? Yesterday live stream was going in many directions. Perhaps my fault for bringing up Kabbalah. Well, part of that is like, I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't watching. Part of that is, I think, I don't know how to handle when I leave a live stream, because I do think there is a responsibility of someone, and I suppose since it's my live stream, it's on me to either delegate responsibility to be the host, to be the Tamadad of the live stream, to lead by example, and to lovingly, in a benevolent, feminine way, guide indirectly the conversation. And to be frank, when you have a bunch of dudes, usually they suck at that, or people that are overly masculine, because they talk too much and they don't leave space and they don't do a lot of listening and asking questions, which is what PBK was very good at in my recent estuary with him. And this guy is very good at it, but I don't know what you mean by that. All right, let's lay out the mosaic. I'm all over the place. That's the Bill Burr aside. I'm going to play the clip that made me think of this from PBK. Nope, not the invite yet. So I'm going to share screen here. Look at this look. Look at your face, PBK. This is how PBK looks at me when how does this is like a meme. PBK, this is what PBK does when he looks at me when I don't know, insult Calvinism. He actually looks mad there. That's ridiculous. But this is the clip I wanted to play, and I'll read my comment. Gavin liked your sermon. And then I want to do some lexicon work, some word study from guess the text where I'm going to go. It's from the New Testament. I'll give you that. It's not from the Old Testament. It's not from the Hebrew scriptures. Here we go. Let's hear what PBK has to say. We're sharing. Let's do this.
Because meaning is actually what we use for suffering. Meaning is in many ways the answer to suffering.
Now that, PBK, good. Meaning is the answer to suffering. Suffering only makes sense-making, with meaning. And the person, the relational unity, is the nexus and the locus of all meaning. So if you avoid the personal, maybe even in your estuaries, we spoke about that in the live stream, you will miss the meaning. You will just live in the abstract thinky-talky land of talking heads with no bodies. And we need men with chests. We need women with chests, right? We need men with chests. We also need women with chests.
And Christianity, of course, puts at the center, within the story of Christianity, someone who need not suffer.
Okay, I'll let you finish your sentence. That's a sentence I want to go back to. I'll finish it and we'll go back. Okay, that was the end. Here we go.
And Christianity, of course, puts at the center, within the story of Christianity, someone who need not suffer.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. This is what we're going to do here. Oppositional processing, undergirded by relational ontology. PBK, I love you. I wage more war not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. That sentence is wrong. I think that sentence is wrong. That's the impetus for this stream. Oh, darn it. Well, I'll read it. No, I'm going to go back. I messed up. You'd think I'd be better at this. Okay, we got to go back, find it, because I got to see the comments. Okay, come on, YouTube. just let me see my history, okay? We gotta get back. Gotta get back, gotta get up, gotta get up, boo-ba-doo-boo. Why do I think about everything in terms of songs? Because I very much do. What is that? For the morning comes, gotta get up, boo-ba-doo-bop. What is that song? I don't know. Here we go. Look, who gave me the like? Good for you. Okay, this is what I say. That comment is the linchpin of the whole conversation about suffering. This is, why did I put a quote there? It should go down here. Christianity put at the center of the story someone who needs not suffer. Disagree. See Father John Bear with Sam. And then I put this. Look at, here we go. Here's the text. He was made perfect by what he suffered. Being and becoming, metamorphosis, theosis. To be a creator creating God is to suffer. Divine simplicity needs to give, to be. Do you realize, okay, this is not to pat myself on the back, but part of it is because I'm like some kind of crazy, weird creative that thinks ahead of my head and I don't even know what I'm saying. This statement is so much better than I thought it was when I wrote it. And this isn't to compliment myself. This just, divine simplicity needs to give. This is like, I feel like when I wrote that, it's like when, I'm not trying to equate myself to Dylan or something, but it's people who are just like, I'm just a conduit. All is gift. And it's almost like when I wrote a lyric, I heard Dylan talk about or something when he wrote Every Grain of Sand. He was just like, I was just, in a sense, he's like, yeah, it's me, but it's not me. And I saw an interview with him recently. I've talked about this, or when he's much older, and he was just like, I can't write like that again. Like I can't do it. God, I want to play that clip actually, because the spirit moves where it wills, and sometimes you're given a gift and then it goes away. And divine simplicity needs to give in order to be, to have being. That is just, that's Zitsum. That's Jesus is God's forgiveness. That is we are God's becoming, George MacDonald. It's just like all of that. It's all of that. And I just, okay, let's do some textual studying here. Share screen. We are going to drum roll, Hebrews 2:10. Now this is clunky because they break it up by the Greek, and so I don't know if people have never seen a lexicon. The internet has fantastic lexicons. I mean, like for dorks who really love language and words and translations and etymologies and how things work, man, you can go into rabbit holes of translation. So if you just type in a verse and then you type in like Hebrews 2:10 lexicon, boom, this is first link. You go there. It gives you the words that are translated into English here on the left. It gives you the Greek word from which it originates. And so like they're interesting things. So like this right here, are all things. That we have that in English, but like it's not, again, Ted S's Convivium on Gerard Manley Hopkins and one-to-one correspondence versus many-to-many correspondence. Words are icons. They mean many things, not infinite things necessarily, because they are embodied within a word and a structure and a language with letters. They have unitive wholes, and so they are bounded. They are relative, meaning they have many-to-many correspondences. They can mean many things. They're polysemous, but not infinitely. That's why all things are relative, but things aren't arbitrary. It's why everything has to be an icon so that it can be creative, so that you can co-create with it and have meaning. This is how meaning works without being a mechanistic one-to-one thing. And languages work this way. So like Greek is here, but it's not one-to-one English. There's always an art, an act of translation. So, but let's just read it. I'll read what it says in English. I can't read Greek. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation, through sufferings. Jacob does not like the book of Hebrews. I think it's fantastic. I love the Bible. I love the Bible. Let me just, okay, here. Stop screen for now. Protestants, Anselman, Phlebas. I love the Bible. I like it. I think it's really cool. I've spent a lot of my life reading it and meditating on it. On your words, I meditate day and night. I should probably do it more with the Old Testament. I'm a very New Testament-y person. Okay, let's go back because we still have not done our stuff. Suffering. Here's the word. How would you even say that in Greek? Pathematon? Pathematon? That which befalls one. In other words, a suffering, a passion. Ooh, are we getting here? From what? Pasco. Pascha. Pascha? Easter? Suffering? Passion? Forbid me not from living. Let me enter into the passion of my Lord. Let's go look at. Let's share another screen. Let's share another one. And let's see what this word means. Pasco. Pasco. It's the Pasco. To suffer, to endure. Here's the original word. It's a verb. Transliteration. Transliteration is just when you have different alphabets, and so just phonetically by sound, you transliterate the word into a different language. So like Greek and English don't have the same alphabets, or Hebrew and English, and so they have transliterations. And so you spell out in English words that they don't have direct correlates. The phonetic spelling, to suffer, to endure, meaning. Now here's the thing. They will give you a meaning. Here we go. This is a definitional understanding of meaning, which to me is an oxymoron. They cannot give you a meaning. They can give you a definition. They can't give you a meaning. They can try, but the meaning is always going to come out of the implanted word, and you need to receive with meekness the implanted word, because Malcolm Guite, meanings cannot be conveyed. They can be awakened. They can be received, because you want gift, not sacrifice. You want mercy, not sacrifice. Gift. This is a lot of what Nate's going on. Nate, I haven't watched your video. I need to. Shout out, plug for Nate's recent conversation. I think he went into it a bunch in the tail end of my live stream yesterday about his distinction between sacrifice and gift. I think Nate has very valuable points to make with that. So what they say their meaning is, which again, I quibble, because there is no meaning in the text without a context, without a reader, without a seer. That's the hard problem of all perception. If a meaning falls in the forest and no one's there to awaken what it means, does it make a meaning? No. I am acted upon in a certain way, either good or bad. I experience ill treatment. I suffer. The concept of suffering in the Old Testament is often expressed through words like, okay, let's go. My Jewish friends, ana. Is that how you say it? I'm guessing. I mean, that's the transliteration. Meaning to afflict or humble, or sabal, meaning to bear or endure. The Greek verb pasco primarily means to suffer or endure hardship or distress. In the New Testament, it is often used in the context of physical suffering, persecution, or the trials faced by Jesus Christ and his followers. The term conveys a sense of enduring hardship with patience and faith. And then again, death, suffering, passion becomes, this is for what Father Bear said, death becomes pedagogical. Death becomes a teacher. Death becomes a door. Because if you voluntarily enter into death and accept it as a gift, removing its pang, it becomes transformative and brings forth new life, a new creation. This stuff is like, it's fundamental, it's elementary to Christianity, but it's profound. Death and life. And then because no one has life in and of themselves. No one has being in and of itself. Technically, within like systematic theology, it's aseity. Only God has aseity, self-life, right? And we don't have life within ourselves. Well, how do you learn that? Through your death. And then you understand that death is a gift. And then you are knowing as you are known. Okay, should we keep reading some here? So help word studies, like cultural and historical background. In the Greco-Roman world, suffering was a common aspect of life, often associated with persecution, illness, or social injustice. For early Christians, suffering was not only a part of daily life, but also a significant aspect of their faith journey. The New Testament frequently addresses the theme of suffering, emphasizing the redemptive and transformative power of enduring trials for the sake of Christ. In name only? Would a rose by any other name be any less sweet? What's in a name? Umberto Eco, in the name of the rose. The name of the rose. Language, naming. Chezi, we need to have that conversation about Adam and naming. What's in a name? Or Robert Irwin, seeing is the name. No. Seeing is forgetting the name of the thing one sees. I think that is the prescription for the problem of a modernity that conflates the alpha thinking Barfield name with the thing in and of itself. Tree is tree. Is your idea of a tree, map and territory, the same thing as treeness, the essence of a thing? Maybe, to a degree, yes and no. The early church viewed suffering as a means of participating in the suffering of Christ, leading to spiritual growth and deeper communion with God. What happens? I was talking to a buddy, a local friend, new local friend about this yesterday. What happens when the early Christian church sees suffering as fundamental to sharing in Christ and becoming, and then it becomes the religion of empire and luxury and power and wealth and control and government? What does that do? What does that do with the fundamental essence of it as suffering and becoming and transformation? Maybe it comes that you want to avoid death. You go to a mortuary. You pump your body full of what is it, chloroform? Anyhow, and they've never looked better, in their casket. They've never looked better. We put makeup on them, we try to make them look vibrant and alive. They're dead. The dead are beautiful, but not in that way. And to avoid entering into that, this is the problem of pain. This is the problem of suffering. This is like here's the thing with like Alex O'Connor and that whole conversation you were talking about, PBK. I mean, okay, we can go read more of this if you want to. I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to talk about one more piece of the Mosaic Vision, Peter Rollins. But before that, here's the problem with the whole problem of suffering. And is that, what if it's not a problem? What if resisting pain is the problem? What if resisting death is the problem? And that's a difference that I love this equation, which is like suffering, and this is to quibble on, this is to make a little bit of a difference in the definition of suffering. But suffering, meaning like existential suffering, to fighting against the wu wei, cutting against the grain, fighting reality. That kind of suffering equals pain times resistance. But what if you don't resist it? Get behind me, Satan. Irenaeus, forbid me not from living. Let me enter into the passion of my Lord. Let me die. Let me follow Christ's example. If you want to try to stop someone's suffering, you might be playing the role of Peter and Satan and preventing their salvation, which seems oxymoronic. It seems insane. It seems like foolishness to the world. I love 1 Corinthians. I love it. For what is 1 Corinthians 2? What is it? For the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is a fragrance of God unto life. And this is very much Jordan Peterson's thing when he talks about most of his clients. Okay, right? And this has to do with time. I want to bring in Stephen D20, talk about time and suffering, and then talk about Peter Rollins. Jordan Peterson talks about a lot of his clients, and I think anybody knows this. Think of your life. Most of the things that you most value in your life are things that you look in retrospect, in your memory, into your past, and you see the painful, hard, difficult things that you willingly endured, sometimes kicking and screaming and dragging your nails, fighting against it, but you endured it, and it made you a better person. It made you stronger. It made you learn forgiveness, love, and maybe that kind of transformation, being married, having children, it learning to self-sacrificially give of yourself unto your willing death for the sake of another is love. It's henosis by kenosis. And then in retrospect, you see that suffering and you're like, I wouldn't trade that for the world. I would not trade that suffering for the world. And in the moment, you're like, I want nothing more than for this to stop. This is the deception of the deceiver, the prince of lies. To remove your suffering, to upload your consciousness and avoid death is to give you hell. It's to give you eternal conscious torment. Consciousness without suffering, without transformation, without becoming is hell. And it's the opposite of what it means to be God. God as a man. And it's just, the deceiver is clever. The deceiver is very clever. And so when Adam and Eve fell and they became like God, knowing good and evil, God in his mercy expelled them from the garden so that from this place of ease, so that by the toil of their brow they could bring forth fruit from the earth and suffer in the hope that they could be saved. And a woman could be saved through the suffering of childbirth. Why? Because giving birth to children and their becoming and being a mother requires a lot of suffering in a way that men don't understand. And it's your glory and your salvation. All right. Was that okay? I want to bring up Peter Rollins because I value him a lot. And I like the guy, and I want to talk. I've mentioned this a lot before, but I want to talk about this. So Peter Rollins made a movie. I've not seen it yet, but I've heard about it a lot, and I'm pretty sure it's Christian. I think it's Christian, but we'll see. Making Love. He made this movie. Let's zoom in here on. That's all right. Too much zoom. Too much zoom. Come on, computer. What are we doing? Thank you. Jeez. Making Love is a noir featurette that I recently produced that is based on an original script I wrote many years ago. It offers a somatic exploration of some central themes in my work. It is about a playwright with a dark past who risks his life in returning to his home city to find out if a woman with whom he had a passionate and illicit affair ever truly loved him, only to learn that it was only ever the unknowing and distance that kept their desire alive. While Making Love is a cinematic study on the nature of drive and death drive and all my Freudian stuff, it is animated by some of the central ideas that underpin pyrotheology, which is burn the theology to the ground. Graham Pardon, you'd like it. It has a theological structure that helps to express the overall task of theology, its relationship to atheism, T-Grug, or who's our Brooklyn skeptic, right? You've been around. And the nature of salvation. None of which will be immediately obvious on first watching the film, but tomorrow's reflection, come on, can we put a apostrophe in here, Peter, should help to bring some clarity. In addition to the film, I've also included a link to the original Kickstarter page that outlines more and more of the background of the film and updates concerning actors, locations, and filming. Go to his Patreon, give him money. I don't. I probably should. I need to go to some Peter Rollins thing at some point, because I like the dude. He also has there's also a YouTube video thing, Making Love, which I'm not going to play. All right. The longing. Peter Rollins talks about, I'll say this one thing about making love. It's one of his illustrations that I've often heard about this, but he talks about how chaperones. Let's chaperone etymology. Let's look at chaperone. I love words, man. Okay, here we go. Chaperone. In late, what would it say? It's from soap. Chaperone, French, something, I don't know. My French is non-existent. English, chaperone. In late Middle English, denoting a hood or a cap, regarded as giving protection for the sake of the angels. From French, feminine of chaperone, hood, diminutive of chape. That would be Italian. Chope, something like that. The current sense dates from the early 18th century. So, but Peter Rollins talks about how an older woman responsible for the decorous behavior of a young unmarried woman at a social occasions. Chaperones sat at the edge of dance, gossiping and watching. So a chaperone at a dance would watch to make sure, you're leaving room for the Holy Spirit, as my Christian school marms used to say. But Peter Rollins makes the point, and this is one of the things, is you think on a superficial level, you think, well, a chaperone's inhibiting love, inhibiting intimacy. No, they're not. The chaperone is fostering intimacy, because in the drive, in the lack, in the distance, in the space, when you're saying like you cannot have this fulfillment, what's that doing? It's manufacturing, it's creating desire. It's like, I want it more. The thing I can't have, I want more. It's foreplay, to some degree, but it's like even more withdrawn foreplay. You're making love. A chaperone is making love. Come on, get with it. So good. All right, let's see what people have to say. I see Joseph, I see Abby, I see William. I'm gonna go pin it. Pin it. Sorry. Here's the thing. Should I ever stop? Come on. Why don't you let me click on my own stuff? YouTube, what is your problem? Home. There we go. If I go to my live stuff while it is ongoing, it won't let me click on it. You have to go to your home thing to pin stuff. Anyhow. Yeah, if you want to, Gavin. Calm down. I will not. Don't tread on me, okay? Don't tell me what to do, Nico. You calm up, all right? This stream is going to strange places. No, Eros is at the heart, man. Love. Erotic love. Agape no, I'm just kidding. Agape is good. All right. When the chat is going fast, I feel the energy, but I also feel sad because it's less likely Luke sees my comments. That's true. I'm just definitely not seeing your comments. I was trying to get things out. Uh-oh, Gavin, you didn't quite have YouTube muted or closed. Hey guys, what do you guys think this morning? What do you think about PK's statement? Do you think he's wrong?
Paul
Jesus
thinks
not suffer?
Peter Rollins is making a porno.
I don't. Oh my gosh. PVK is a super troll in the chat. Although not the kind of troll that Yon God talked about. That kind of troll terrifies me. Who will make like 100 accounts to try to ruin you. People that do that kind of thing, like you're troubled. You are troubled.
PVK doesn't get to talk like this anywhere else. He has to let it out somewhere.
That's true.
He's becoming one of us. He's condescending.
We're where
Wow,
it's his true self. He's letting it out.
So
That's right.
wait, restate what Paul said again, Luke.
He
It's back on track.
the exact statement was something like, at the core of Christianity is this person, Jesus, that need not suffer. And I'm like,
Right.
that's like the most anti-Christian message I've ever heard. Like, I think you don't understand Christian. Maybe you're misspeaking, and maybe my clarification helped, but I almost couldn't disagree with that statement more.
Yeah, I think I talked about this briefly yesterday. Was just or maybe it was the day before, who knows, but just that the two images of Christ, one is Christ, okay, two images of Christ on the cross: Christ paying for our sins, suffering the penal substitutionary atonement, and then there's Christ on the cross creating the world.
Yes.
And like, it's not either or. It, like, I won't even say that. I'll just be like, both things are happening, but there's one that's like sort of a greater depiction of what's happening, and that's the creation of the world. And the pain for the sins is part of it, but it's like part of it. It's not the whole thing.
Yes.
And so when you think about that, then all of a sudden, like, sin is still a big part of the story because it affects us so much, and it does in all that. But Christ would have come and done what he did anyway to make sure creation could be. At least that's how I see it.
Well, this is something I didn't want to bring in, but it's the whole time Stephen D20 multiverse thing. Like, when Jesus made choices, they were determined. So like when people are talking about God could have done otherwise or Jesus could have done otherwise, you're talking nonsensical bullshit. You really are. And if you can't see it, I don't know how to explain it to you. And I want to just point out some things in here. All you Sola Scriptura Protestants, I don't buy that you believe Sola Scriptura, and I can point out by your comments.
So Luke, you think we all have free will except for Christ?
I don't. Well, I've started to
everything is predestined.
I've started to soften on my understanding of free will, even perhaps libertarian free will, because in God's grace, I've been open to the possibility that I don't see things perfectly, and He's given me some humility there.
Praise God.
Praise God. I don't. So I've softened on it. I still have some convictions, but they're not as strong as they used to be.
So let me attempt to clarify what I think. Because I think everything you've said has been generative and cool and fun and nice to think about. But I still think that you're fundamentally missing the small point that Paul was making with that one sentence that you've turned into a live stream, which is, I think that Paul was pointing specifically to the aspect of Christ who knew no sin. And I think that you're basically just pointing to the fact of he became sin. And it's obviously both, right? Christ need not suffer because of his sin.
You're talking like 2 Corinthians 4:20 or whatever. He who knew not sin became sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God.
Yeah, I don't really care about the actual verse or the context therein. I'm more so saying that what Paul was pointing to when he says Christ who need not suffer, he was specifically talking to he need not suffer due to any mistakes he made or sins he may have committed, because he didn't make any mistakes and he didn't commit any sins.
Yeah, but it's still framing suffering in terms of like suffering is only for punishment of sin
and moral in moral categories, not in the transformative becoming category.
Yeah, well, which way was Paul talking about it? That's the question.
I would argue it wasn't the moralistic category. I think that's a Latin eisegesis on the text, post-Augustine.
I've been taking notes.
Sweet.
So I got notes for each person.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I'm scared.
So, PVK is a pastor, right?
I know.
And so, like, he's not like I don't need to go explain reality to a child when the child's hurting and when they need to be encouraged. So that's things really important. And so I toss that out there. Like, I'm not exactly sure what these pastors are doing, but maybe they're doing something like pastoring or coaching or trying to really encourage their flock. So that's in him, I'm guessing. And then there's this thing between the worlds, like Paul mentioned it in a sermon. Like, there's all these different worlds, and so there's the question of, do we know, like, this world that we're in now? How well do we know it? And we might want to talk. And I heard Luke talking about how God works, and it's like, are you so sure you know how God works in these worlds? And then what is going to take priority or importance in a context between the world we're in and these other worlds that are real? So that's all. That's the like mosaic of what everybody said in my response.
Yeah, I would say do I understand God in the way of Chad's not estuary yesterday? Who was it? It was someone's thing.
I could present God and this world and his interacting in this world in a way that disagrees with the way you had presented God, right?
Sorry, I was still thinking about what I was trying to remember. What did you say?
I'm just saying you had presented God and his relationship to this world with a kind of confidence. And I was like, well, I could see a different way.
Sure.
And where I would disagree with you. And it's like, really, we don't know. But I could definitely see a different way that God relates to the world. And I mean, but that's a topic that we could talk about. But then maybe the more important, what's the most important topic to talk about here? I'm not sure. Like the primacy. To me, the most important topic would be kind of how should Paul be speaking about suffering? Like, there might be the truth of what Jesus did in his suffering, and maybe what each one of us do at any moment in our suffering. But if you're a pastor or a coach or trying to encourage someone, maybe that's the act of love. I don't need to lecture you on suffering, but maybe I love you, and maybe that's what Paul's doing.
Well, and that's kind of what Mandy's even saying here. She said, like, to embody Christ is to willingly suffer for and with suffering, not stand outside of their pain, telling them they just need to realize it's actually great. Okay, so like, if I was doing this live stream, not talking about ideas in the merely intellectual realm, and I was talking to a family whose mother is going through cancer, and I was just like, you know what, just get over it. This is like really good.
Suck it up.
I would be an asshole. That's not what I'm doing here.
I have to say that's in me too. Sometimes I'm just like, yes, they're suffering. This is so good for you, but you just don't know it.
That's one of the things is like, whenever I talk to my dad about this, he likes to break it down into like a pastoral message and like a theological message. He always makes these dichotomies, and there's a point to that. Like we're like, you don't want to make theological points to someone, but the other side of me is sort of like if something's true, it should be true in all situations, and it should be able to
Jess, and here's the thing. The conservatives, I'm not putting your dad in this camp, but like the conservatives or the people that disagree with me, they want to make their theological truth points, and then I do it and disagree with them, and they're like, Luke, you're being very. It's like, come on, guys. Don't be terrible.
but like how, like what's the truth of the person suffering in the moment? Is there another message that we give in that moment rather than at a different moment when we talk about maybe reflecting on suffering after we've kind of dealt with it? Like there are different points of views, like, and I think both should like be honored. Like the person in their suffering is actually dealing with something real, and but also there is a truth to when it says in James, be thankful for when you suffer, because suffering produces I forget the perseverance, hope.
Why does James say that to people who are suffering? What a dick.
Well, that's kind of what I mean. That I'm like, what's the theological, what's the truth that could be said in both those situations that would be both an encouragement, and this is personal too. Like some people, I guess you just can't say anything to, whether it's true or not. but I'm interested in that because I don't want there to be a difference between like how we're talking about it now or how we would talk about it with someone who's like going through something right now.
You don't
know.
want there to be a difference?
I don't want there to be a difference in how we talk about it.
Man, I don't know that that's possible.
Well, I know, but that's what I want to do.
You want the impossible. You're like God.
That's always my impulse is always to like bring things together and like there shouldn't be difference, but there obviously is. There's a difference even when you're going through it and then after you pass through.
Okay, Joseph, what up?
Jason.
Thanks for coming.
My impulse is to break things apart and to point out differences, as we all know. So, I know Kazi was talking about we should do a Genesis thing with me and him, but I just want to bring up. So there's this reading of the Hagar and Ishmael story in Genesis that I really like. That before Abraham gets the promise of Isaac and all that stuff, Ishmael was supposed to be the one who inherited him. He was supposed to be the son of the covenant. And what happens? And there's this fascinating reading that points out that not only is Hagar an Egyptian and a servant, slave, but she goes through all of the same types of afflictions and sufferings that the Jewish people will when they're slaves in Egypt. And they connect these two stories. They say actually that one is essentially the consequence of the other. That is an interesting, that's a whole other kind of point. But one of the things that happens is she is offered the covenant. In this, and this is going not this specific reading, but she seems to be offered the covenant that Ishmael is going to be the inheritor if he's willing to take on this suffering. And she sees the suffering that she's undergone with Sarah. She sees the suffering that now that her son has undergone, being kicked out, and she refuses that as the future of her child. She does not want her child to be the son of the covenant. The covenant means suffering. And that does not mean that he does not become a nation, right? He still becomes a nation. He just doesn't become the Jewish people, right? He has a different role in the world. And he still gets a blessing, right? Like it's not like none of that happens. Things still happen with him. He doesn't just get discarded like by the wayside. And when you think like he's often portrayed as like this rejected child, but like he's still the father of a nation. Now he's associated with an entire massive religion, right? As the father of Islam in many ways, or the Arabs, whatever. But there was in this reading, there is this really interesting point where Abraham, right? What does he promise when he gets the covenant in the next like chapter, right? Or 2 chapters, right? It's a covenant where they're going to be slaves for 400 years, and like that they're going to have to undergo this suffering process, and it's going to teach the people, right? Like God is going to use that as this like way to build empathy, right? And they're going to learn how you were slaves in Egypt, therefore do not treat other people this way because you know what it's like to be a stranger, to be a slave. Love the stranger. Like all those principles come out of this. They couldn't have gotten to that foundation without suffering. But there is a real choice to be made there. At least I'm not going to talk about Jesus because I'm not doing Christology. But like on the human level, there is a choice that's being made here, that's presented on whether you want to accept the covenant that will entail suffering or not. And if you don't, that's fine, right? At some level, like a mother, like she's being given this choice at the peak of her own suffering, right? She is literally, her child is crying, dehydrated, sick, whatever, in the desert. She can't even like stand to hear his cries at this point. Like, so she like moves away from him. She's been kicked out. She's been made to suffer. And then like, she's just been disinherited essentially. Or her son's been disinherited from what she thought was going to be like their future. And at that point, like she cannot handle, and this gets, I think, to Jeff, right? Like, I don't think you can talk to people about suffering in the same way at every point, because to me, that's not personalism, right? Personalism is meeting the person where they're at now. And if Hagar had this conversation before her son was born, when she first got pregnant, let's say, or like, right, she does have that conversation, right? We actually see she has that conversation. She does go back. She says, maybe I am up for this. Maybe I can stick this out. But then, later she can't. And right, each moment kind of presents itself. I mean, this is more than personalism. I mean, this is a particularism of relationship, right? Like at each point in the relationship, there are differences in time. that are really meaningful. And in some ways, like there's not even judgment of her for this, right? Like she feels in that moment God's love, right? She says, "I've been seen and heard by God." She names her, right? Like she really does see that. And what's really interesting is, right, that they have this well of right, this source of life, of water, of the God that sees me. And that's the same place that Isaac is going to go to after he's bound and almost sacrificed, right? Like he does reconcile with Ishmael. They're not at war with each other, right? They bury their father together, but even before that, like they're hanging out together. And they're hanging out together in some ways because even though Ishmael's mother has rejected the suffering for her descendants, Ishmael and Isaac both go through essentially a sacrifice, like Abraham rejecting, like, seemingly trying to get rid of them, killing them, and they both kind of have this like shared, almost like trauma bonding experience that they then process, it seems, together in many ways. A lot of layers to this, obviously, but
I do really good, Joseph.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about when Luke was talking. Now he's disappeared, so I don't know if he'll respond. But anyway, we can talk about theodicy and when you should talk about pain in different ways. I mean, this also is in Job, right? Job's friends, and I think they are his friends. I mean, I know there's like a little bit, they hurt him, but I don't think they could have hurt him the way they did unless they were his friends, right? In some way. And but they don't start with their art speeches. They first come to him and comfort him and show that, and sit with him in silence for 7 days, right? That was not, those first 7 days are not the time to have this discussion. Maybe it wasn't the time even after those first 7 days. Maybe they should have waited a year, 10 years, or whatever. But like, we definitely see there's a process here of processing suffering. In many ways, that's what the book is, right? When we've talked about like Job as a cathartic experience and reading through it, like as a processing experience, right? Like, and it's not the same at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, right? You need to go through the different stages of grief or whatever stages of whatever is happening, metanoia, is whatever you think's happening in that book. And they can't be the same fundamentally, right? They have to be different.
Yeah.
The answer we give the person at the beginning cannot be the answer we give at the end.
Right. Yeah, that's really good, Joseph. Where in the Hagar story do you remember specifically what? Because I don't remember her. Like I remember her having to put him, or she left him and then like walked away because she couldn't handle the cries. But where does she get offered the promise?
I'd have to pull it up. I don't actually have it right in front of me, and I'm on a. Okay. But
I was just curious if you
but
knew
yeah,
it all.
I mean, it's not. This is where there's a little bit of exegesis. Like this is where like there's language that like reflects the promise, but I don't know. I can't remember if it's explicit.
It's subtle.
I have to check it. But it's very clear that like she is like that until Isaac, like Ishmael, she does expect him to be the inheritor. Like there's all this language, plus like we know now we have archaeology. We actually have lots and lots of texts that parallel what happened in this story that like actually said talk about taking your not usually given by the wife, but like taking a servant as a wife when you don't have an inheritor, and that person becoming your new inheritor. Like we have contracts for that and documents that talk about how to do that, or that wasn't done. So we have a lot of really interesting kind of material on this. But anyway, whatever. That's
what do you make of Paul's statement that Luke?
I haven't watched Paul's thing yet. I mean, so I saw Luke's individual statement. It's really interesting because I was just talking on Jacob's server to Brian, also known as Marcher, or one of our resident Thomists around here, or I guess he prefers Scholastic, I think. And BizCat, who is who's only really in Jacob's server, but he's a Byzantine Catholic who has a YouTube channel on philosophy, on Catholic philosophy. It's really interesting. And we were just talking about the history of the idea of whether the incarnation is contingent or necessary, and at least historically, both in the East and West, it seems, among fathers and later in the kind of philosophical schools, the incarnation is always understood as contingent. In fact, in some places, like there's an expression that that's a dogmatic belief in Catholicism that is contingent, which means that God chose to incarnate. You can also talk about the same thing. God chose, volunteered to be crucified. This is a very, very different take from Luke's kind of deterministic, like God doesn't have choices, this view. But we've talked about this with Luke before. Like Luke strongly believes that creation, God had no choice but to create the world. And therefore, if that's true, God has no choice but to incarnate. So he's very coherent and consistent if he's here and listening.
Luke's wrong. I'll just say Luke's wrong.
I think that's wrong too, from a Jewish perspective. And I also think, I don't know, there's funny things here, right? So I think there's something very Hegelian in this approach. Though I don't think Luke gets it from there. I don't know if he gets it from something within Calvinism. I don't know Calvinism well enough, but I'm pretty sure Calvinism stresses God's sovereignty and choice in the creation of the world, at least. I don't know where the coherence is, and I can't read comments right now on my phone. So I'm sure PVK or someone from the Reformed camp is filling in the proper theology.
Is the incarnation, is there an insistence on incarnation in Jewish theology as well?
Well, there's no incarnation in Jewish theology.
There's no, well, what about when God creates the world? Those
in the creation of the world, God chose to create the world, and that's all. That is God's ultimate act. I mean, God is always ultimately acting absolutely freely. But yes, for us, that's the expression of love and grace in many ways. Is that voluntary symptom of God in creating the world and making space for others.
What I'm asking, I guess, is more like maybe the image of God in man. So you have the image, partial images of God in all His creation, but also the image of God being in Adam. Is that I guess I'm not quite sure what I'm asking. I'm not sure if that's making sense. So that's not kind of that, you wouldn't frame that as an incarnation. There just seems to be an emphasis on the body and the bodily resurrection, and so
yes,
and within Jewish theology as well. And so I'm wondering what that comes from, if the incarnation isn't stressed that much, I guess.
I mean,
some sort of incarnation.
The way that we incarnate God is by imitating His actions, essentially. That's the closest, right? So that is the commandments. That is imitatio Dei, imitation of the divine, right? That is, but that's the closest we have to that, right? We don't, but we are all in some sense incarnating God in the world, but that is us, and of course that comes out of free will. That's our free will. That's not. But yeah, I mean, God chose to make man in His image, right? Let us make man. That is an invitation, right? That is not a statement that's not a command or a necessity. But even in the commands, we say God could have not created the world. I mean, I know this doesn't make sense for Luke. I know it doesn't make sense in your world. I get that. Well, for us, I guess, this is very, very important in Jewish theology.
Well, it's been important to me a lot. That's why I'm really curious about it, because I keep saying, if Jesus or God forgives me, I don't really care. I think this gets at the idea was in Genesis where Jacob returns to Esau and he says, "I see your face like I see God's face." Because I'm just kind of if I don't have that, I don't really know what else there is. And so I was wondering if that's there in Judaism as well, if God he is just a spirit, and he's there's really, this is the personal way to kind of know God through each other, through these us imitating Him. No.
You first need to know man to know God, right? Okay. But so you can't. I mean, this is the creation of Eve, for instance, is because man, even though man is alone with God, man can't actually come to his fullness of his relationship with God until he has other people to teach him how to love properly. But those are separate. God is not just the expression through people. God is a person. I mean, God, and there's an important you need to have the forgiveness of the person you harmed before you can ask God for forgiveness. This comes right. We have this I'd say we have it in Job, but we definitely have it with Abraham too. So Abraham, Avimelech was told, get Abraham, appease Abraham so that he will forgive you, and if he can forgive you, then I will forgive you. right? But that's not saying that I will automatically forgive you just because Abraham does. That's saying like you have to fix this. This is the same thing in the New Testament, right? With if you are bringing a sacrifice and you haven't I can't remember what the word is, appeased whatever your fellow man that you've harmed, you put the sacrifice down and go and like fix that relationship before you come back and try to have a relationship with me. So that's right. Yeah. This is all the same kind of package, but you still have a separate relationship with God than you do with man. Like it's not that it's only limited to that of man.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the thing is with like the contingency and the necessity, it's dependent on what the nature of like reality is, and because if it is like the panentheist thing where everything is within God, then there is, it's not necessary for him to incarnate, but if he does that, what that allows for is a possibility of a different relationship, the fullness of the creature creator distinction that isn't fully realized in this time, which I think is kind of like, what I missed a lot of Luke's monologue, but I think in saying this, the thing with creation and suffering, and we're like, Paul talks about that all of creation is going through birthing pains and stuff. Like, in one sense, it's like, in this moment, we have no existence apart from God. And not that we will ever have an existence apart from God, but the incarnation is the path through which, ultimately we can become like him, see him face to face. It's because and the birth analogy is important in a sense, because a child in a woman's womb is real, but and that child does not cease to be connected to the mother after the birth, but the nature of their relationship is very different. And so like the fullness of that thing comes through the birth. And as far as like the suffering aspect of it, I think, that's just the sense of like, once you see like the final thing that you're aiming at, the suffering becomes inconsequential, essentially, or it's a price you're very willing to pay. And I can even use like my wife as the example. With each child that she's had, her desire for children has increased, and the memory of like, oh, pregnancy is difficult and all this stuff, and even she's had to have a major surgery each time because all her kids ended up coming through C-section. That's a major recovery.
And mothers can die in the process.
Yeah. But she's, basically it's like, oh, the knowing now like the potential joy of having another child and how wonderful that is just reduces, it's like what Peterson says, like you don't become less afraid, but you become more courageous when you face adversity. And so, essentially that joy, it levels the cost. So where and that's what I think ultimately, with Christ, it's like, oh, the cost of having fully realized creation, like what he desires, the new heavens and the new earth, and a multitude of people from every tribe and tongue that he can relate to in that full way. The cost of death, which is something that's ongoing in a sense, as like an omniscient being, it's like a permanent thing that happens. He counts it worth it, and that's why he says, for the joy set before him, he endures the cross, scorning its shame. So
I have a question. It kind of goes with what Joseph was talking about. Like, so like you're just saying, Michael, there's kind of like this bar set. It'll be like, accept your suffering, realize what it's doing in you and in the world, and the good things that can come from it, all this stuff. But Joseph brought up the point with the Hagar story that Hagar sort of doesn't want to accept that, and that God makes an allowance for it. Would that be right to say? So, you even see this, you see this in people's lives for sure, where they go through something and they're like, what the hell? This is not right. And this is even, Job is sort of makes this statement where he's like, what's the point? I don't agree with any of this. And so we kind of have this, if someone is like, I am willing to take this on, lay down my life for my brother and do this. I think we see that as there's not really a problem there, but what if someone objects to the suffering and then God makes an allowance for that?
Well, I mean, I think that the thing that's like the transformative aspect of it, and what changes after Christ is that, okay, so if you look at the other example of great suffering, like with Joseph, he's not having a good time. He's telling those cupbearer and guys hey guys, remember me, I'm in prison still, and they forget about him. But then ultimately when he gets through the whole thing, then he's able to forgive his brothers and say what you intended for evil, God intended for good.
Yeah, there's the retrospective. So after you pass through, maybe you object as you go through, but then on reflection, you're able to consent. We'll just use that language.
Yeah. Well,
after the fact, where you say, okay, I see how all things work towards good, so people change obviously, but I'm kind of curious just about this God making the allowance for Hagar but even that, like you said, Joseph, Ishmael still goes through something similar to Isaac, and so in some ways you don't get to avoid it.
Well, he does in some sense, he does, right, because he gets a foretaste of it, that was she was like, this is what suffering will be like. This will be like to see the suffering of your descendant. Are you up for seeing the suffering of the rest of your descendants? In a sense, and she's like, no. Because she's asked this question after he suffers, not before. But I do think right there. I mean, I know you're talking about Joseph, Michael, but I think the other story of great suffering in some ways is more Jacob, right? In that same moment, right? So Jacob is sitting there, not thinking his son's dead, and he does not he doesn't talk to God during his suffering. Right? From the time basically from after Beit El, and once then Rachel dies and the attack on Dinah, and then Yosef and Judah and Tamar, right? And then his grandsons die, right? All of these bad things happen. He does not talk to God again until he hears that Joseph is alive. And because in his suffering, he is not able to, there's actually this comes down later in ideas of that prophecy in Judaism, that there are types of suffering that you cannot connect to God from because you're in such a dark place, right? You're lost. And you cannot have the right mindset and lens and to have this, we're talking about these transformative experiences of suffering, but in some sense, the transformative experience of suffering is partly because you feel distant from God, because you're how could God do it, right? There is, I know we can talk about Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why have you abandoned me, right? This is also the same thing, right? That is, right, the suffering of the distance of the, I don't know, whatever we're going to call it, being in the shadow or the moon being concealed or whatever. There's a million metaphors for this.
Well, we obviously, people have different capacities for suffering, and there's a limit to where, if somebody receives too much suffering with not enough context and experience, it's traumatizing, and it really does them harm, and their development is stunted or whatever, and they may never recover. What the mercy that God, I always assume God's going to be very merciful to those people on the other, on the other side of things. But, if you think about with children, if the parents don't inflict suffering, just through the means of being normal parents trying to raise children, to some limits of their, or within reason to the their children's capacity, then the children end up suffering later. So like I think we see, like with Job and with Joseph, like there is some unique aspect of those people that had a capacity to endure suffering long enough that they could see the the other side of that. For other people, it can happen in various places, but like then it's like you need to give some sort of suffering to like children within their capacity. The goal is to do it within their capacity so that they learn, and then they have that capacity to see forward where they could voluntarily say, I'll take a risk even though I might suffer. And I think that's where you get to like the place of like a really godly person is willing to lay down their life for some cause or whatever, because they say like, hey, if I take this suffering on myself, even if it means death, it means that those who I love are going to have so much more opportunities to flourish or whatever. But
So
that
there's a number of things in there that you said that I think are important to maybe linger on, or that stuck out to me is the first thing I thought of is people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and then how they overcome that. It's not by avoiding their trauma or their suffering. It's by voluntarily entering into it. And then I also think of the verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, I just looked it up, of God not tempting you beyond what you can bear, which, guess what? It doesn't feel that way for a lot of people. But is God lying? I mean, what's going on with that? And then also, you think of it just in basic things, whether it's like holding your breath, enduring cold, lifting weights. How are you transformed? How do you get better at things? By lifting more than you can, breaking your muscle so that it can rebuild. It's just how transformation happens, fundamentally.
But in some ways, because that transformation is happening and you feel most distant from God, when he's the most seems like concealed or contracted from you,
yes,
you are, and this goes back to the child example for Sartori, right? That the person becomes their own. Like they get a sense of autonomy, they get a sense of self, which is kind of this, right? It's like as the parent like pulling back and saying, "You're going to try this," or it's like, "You don't think you can handle this? I'm going to give you something like a little more."
Quick insertion. There's such a great show on Netflix. It's this Japanese show where parents take their little kids that are like, sometimes they're like under 2 or 3 or 5, and they send them out on neighborhood errands. It's the coolest shit ever. Me and my family watch it. Our whole family loves it. It's so great. What is it? It's called, I'll look it up. What is it? Anyhow, sorry, I interrupted. Keep going.
No, that show is like deeply philosophical. Like it's such a like
so great.
It's almost like the most profound show you'll ever watch, just because it shows you what the kids do and don't understand. And yeah, it's very.
And it's exactly what you're talking about, Yosef. Sorry, yeah.
I want to add a comment to Michael though, with regards to. There's a character. I'm using 2 characters. There's a character in the Bible, or at least we're told as such. His name is Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he decides to jump into the Sea of Reeds before it opens up. And he jumps in, and the water gets up to his waist, and then gets up to his chest, and then gets up to his mouth and nose. And as he's about to die, the water splits. And in a certain sense, there's like he got in over his head, so to speak. And there's a sense of like I'm willing to sacrifice it all. However, if you recall, the sacrifice of Isaac is a test for Abraham and not a test for Isaac. And that's because giving your life up is really what we should all be doing, because life itself is a gift. So is it really such a big ask from the master of the universe to ask me to return my soul? I don't know if that's such a big ask. I don't know if Isaac wasn't looking at this as, oh, so much is being asked from me. Rather, he willingly, according to some, is going up and allowing this to happen, because for him, this makes sense. What God is coming to teach us, not only is it a test for Abraham, but very much Are there circumstances where one may need to give his life? Yes, but that is not the requirement, and that is not that's not what is being asked from us. Rather, instead of sacrificing, as we wake up in the morning and we say, "It's not I think, therefore I am," we say, "I think, I'm thankful." Obviously, I need to be giving myself fully up to God, but God is requesting of me to live through Him and make sure that it's a living Torah.
That's a good point, because I was just about to say, yeah, when you're depressed, you're just kind of in that place where you're like, why won't God kill me already? You know, but you kind of need that. I guess that last thing you said, that remembrance of it's a gift and it's a requirement for Him to live through me. Or
that was something I mentioned yesterday towards the end of the stream. You know, that what Paul says in Romans is he says to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. So in the sense that, like, okay, you know, Christ has brought you into this relationship with God. Yes, some people like need to be a martyr, but like martyrdom cannot be the normal, like the normative path for life. That, you know, when that happens, you know, then you go extinct or whatever. Like in some cases that's very it's very powerful. Like, you know, missionaries that have been martyred. Oftentimes that experience brings more people into the relationship. But in other ways, it means, you know, and this is a sort of a thing that I think probably has been underemphasized in a lot of the Christian tradition, you know, is that you should be, like, you are sacrificing your life by living it to the fullest, in a sense, which means, you know, joyous. Like, you know, I think, you know, like, as I've made a kind of big deal in studying through my book, like, it seems to me like the normal mode for like evangelism to your community should be something like the Feast of Tabernacles, which is, you know, a celebration where you are doing without some comforts, but, you know, you're supposed to invite your neighbors, and it's a focus on like, hey, we have community, we have fellowship, we have food, and it's supposed to be a joyous occasion. And you know, that's like you living with your life as a living sacrifice. You're spending your time and your resources to bless the people around you, and it makes life good.
That's one thing that, like, a pretty simple point, but like, how much of the narrative and how much of the story that you're telling yourself, like, people say like, I'd only be happy with X, Y, or Z, but it's so obvious that that's just a narrative. Like, Sam Harris actually uses a good example of, like, if you made someone experience what it's like to go through Navy SEAL training, it'd be like a torture device. Like, if you sat them in a chair and made them like feel the feeling of going through Navy SEAL, it'd be torture. But people volunteer to go through Navy SEAL training all the time, every year, whatever. Buds, you know, everyone's obsessed with Buds training on David Goggin, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's because there's a story that tells you that this suffering is worthwhile, is good, that you actually learn to appreciate. So it's an obvious point, but it's just like that story's everything. And I think God calls us to recognize that we're always right where He needs us to be, that we just need to see what we need to do in the current context of, like, you know, nothing, you know, if you're a millionaire one day and the next day you lose all your money, nothing's really changed. You're just, you know, you just need to find the story of what God needs you to do in that moment. But, you know, there's no set point of like, I'll be happy when X happens, or I'll be happy when this happens. Like, that's insane.
Okay, two things. Admin stuff. Yosef, I want you to talk. Then McMo, you get to talk. Then I'm just going to shut it down in 10. Sorry, no 6-hour stream. Yosef, go.
Sure. I was going to say, we're talking a lot about, like, you know, what God asks of you. I know you just said it, Corin Citizen. I know Michael was doing it earlier. But going back to Chezi's point, this is not a test of Isaac, right? It's a test of Abraham. And I asked Gavin this once, actually, a long time ago. And actually, it wasn't that long ago. I asked him, and one thing, a lot of people will say, okay, if God asked this of me, you know, give up my life, whatever, I would do it. If God asks you to kill your child, would you do it? Right? To give up the life of your child, would you do it? Not for their suffering, not for like, right, but to give up their life so something else could happen down the line, you know, like some other, you know, events. It doesn't have to be someone else's life is saved, right? Like some other like branch of history happens. would you do it? I mean, and in some ways, like the test of Abraham is a lot harder than the test of would you give your own life up. That's not the test of Abraham, right? The test of Abraham is would you give up life for your child? And there's a real ambiguity about what the right answer is, right? Because Abraham thinks the answer is yes, right? He thinks that is the right answer, and God seems to say that's not the right answer. I mean, I know Nate and Luke and I have debated this, for years, but like there's a much harder question to answer here. And at what point, I saw Nick Mo's reaction, so I'm just gonna contract myself. I'm gonna yield the floor to him.
I was going to say, well, the example that I would put to Joseph is that's probably more easy to contemplate is like, should David have executed Amnon, and what would have happened with Absalom if he had stepped in instead of doing nothing?
I'm going to say something really quick, and then I'll let McMahon speak. This is probably super controversial on a stream with all these Christians. In some ways, Christianity gives too easy of an answer to this, because by making God his own son, and then just a self-sacrifice, they don't really deal with the question of, are you willing to give up your child who's a different and independent being from you, to kill them, for history to happen, right? For the world to be created.
How is that not Christian?
No, I'm saying Christianity makes it too easy by making it, because God is just saying, I'm just going to kill myself. So there's no real sacrifice, right? I'm not going to kill someone else or something else. I'm just going to kill myself.
But
and
he's
that's
not
it.
killing himself. That's not Trinitarian.
I agree that it's my turn, Luke.
Okay,
No.
Yosef has ordained me to speak. Yeah, so I do think that oftentimes, specifically with the Abraham question, Christianity makes itself far too easy. And the way that Kierkegaard explains this, and I think it's true, is that that essentially they do the move that Yosef just laid out, that Abraham, either as a symbol, was called to sacrifice his best, and so we are, called to sacrifice our best. Very rarely do we see the horror of that our best may be our firstborn and promised child. But then Kierkegaard basically takes note of Abraham's silence up Mount Moriah. And he basically says that there's two options to this. So one is the night of infinite resignation. That is to say that you can take all of the suffering of the world, all of the harm, all of the evil, and you can resign to the will of God and just basically say, it is what it is. I'm going to give up on all of my earthly desires that, want the Garden of Eden or New Jerusalem to be here now. And I'm going to sit transparently in what God wants me to be. But the thing about the story of Abraham is that he is both willing to sacrifice Isaac, and he also receives Isaac back. And so that is where the absurdity of the night of faith comes in, because you have to have a touch of paradox or absurdity to be willing to sacrifice something and also expect to receive it back. So that, I think, is the answer to even the suffering question. But there's also the confusion that we oftentimes confuse suffering, big S suffering, with our own personal, capital D, despair. That is to say that it might not be that much suffering that we're undergoing, but because our hearts are curved inward, you could say, or because we fail to sit transparently in the paradox of being the synthesis of the infinite and the finite, we feel a discomfort with who we are and who we see ourselves as. And so that discomfort or that despair is a totally different problem than the sufferings of the world. But I'll just leave that as my last 2 cents.
Hey, I want to close it right there. That was good. That was well said, McMill. And if people have more to say, get the next hit on the next stream. All right. See you guys. Thank you for coming. Bye, everyone.